I was one of the founders of Gwenda's Garage, which was in Sheffield in the 80s. We had to set up because we couldn't get work as women. There wasn't the climate for women to be taken on. We were older women, we were in our 30s. There was always an excuse as to why they couldn't employ a woman. We didn't interview as well. We were all lesbians, but we were not out as lesbians. We were there as a women's garage. Men did men's cars and women's cars, but we were portrayed as a women's garage.
Part of the Archive, it's a community interests company, and the purpose of it is to bring LGBT material, lives and histories out of archives into public spaces. We animate them, bring them to life. That's our mission, really. That's what we're about.
If you're a lesbian living in Sheffield, you've heard of Gwenda's Garage, and you'd hear little snippets of stories, and it was really clear that the women involved in that had a great community, there was a great community of activism, and that they got things done.
Well, Gwenda's story, we heard a lot over the years of people talking about Gwenda's Garage. They were pioneers. They would not use that word about themselves, but there's no doubt that they were.
There's a whole other world out there that hasn't perhaps been given as much attention.
It felt like normal, because this is how it should be. Why not set up a women's garage? You know, because if they've got the skills and they can do it, then that's what they should do. It was part of a whole kind of wave of women's liberation.
I think that the 80s was a growing movement, a growing space for women to be able to do that. In some ways, it was more of a growing space and a growing era than it is now.
We're so used to go out and protest about things. We had lots of protests about having control over our own reproductive rights. There were all the early campaigns for abortion rights. There were women of mixed heritage like me, there were Caribbean women, there were Asian women. It felt very important for people to understand that what we were doing, challenging anything that was demeaning to us or that was trying to suggest that women couldn't do as whatever they wanted, really. In those days, it was really, really different to how it is now.
We had a community, and I think that that commitment and energy to change helped spur us on.
Stories from the LGBTQ community are very rarely heard. That's starting to change, but they really matter because this is a community that has only really emerged into a more free way of living in the last 30 to 50 years.
There was a lot of hiding. There was a lot of hiding. And I think that being the mechanic was something that I found very empowering. There was the whole thing about Clause 28.
Section 28 was during the Thatcher government, and it was basically instructing local councils to not allow any promotion of homosexual relationships in schools. They were supposed to not teach anything that implied that there was such a thing as gay and lesbian relationships.
Maggie! Ow, ow, ow! Lesbian mothers are not pretending! Lesbian mothers are not pretending! Lesbian mothers are not pretending!
There was a lot of issues around lesbians who wanted to have children. And I tried to foster in the 80s and was turned down on the grounds that I was a lesbian. Yeah, I mean, I'd been a youth worker, so I was kind of a good candidate for fostering, and that would have made enough money for me to not have to have worked. And in fact, I did the training course, and at the end of the training course, it was, okay, so sign on the dotted line here. And I said, I am signing on the dotted line, but in my application, I will say that I'm a lesbian because I couldn't actually hide that from teenage girls that I would be fostering. And with the Director of Social Services, and he interviewed me and he said, no. I said, okay, if I'm going to be refused, I'll save the ink and I won't fill in the form. And thankfully, lesbians and gay men can foster children and adopt children now. And that has been because of the movement, a grassroots movement from the bottom, but that movement didn't come from the government. It came from a groundswell of people saying, we need change, we need equal rights.
A lot of talk these days about role models for particular things. In a way, I think that's what things like Gwenda's Garage and Women in Manual Trades did. To go back and remember those times, I think is really good.
These stories couldn't be told and people couldn't live their full selves in public. So that means that a culture and a history for this community hasn't been able to grow up alongside it and develop and flourish. And the only way that that can happen is if we start to discover our own histories and our own stories and make them public. There's a whole other world out there that hasn't perhaps been given as much attention. So it's really important that Historic England is encouraging us to focus on those other stories.
I don't think that there are any disadvantages or advantages in terms of the mechanics of being a woman. If I can't lift something, then a man shouldn't be lifting something because it means it's over the lifting weight that's acceptable. What's right for a man is right for a woman.